So, we are currently with Moses at the top of Mount Sinai as he receives the law from God. Last week we went through the 10 commandments, which are going to be written on the stone tablets that he's going to bring down the mountain. But this week we read chapters 22 and 23, which is a section that's traditionally been called the Book of the Covenant. The Book of the Covenant, it contains 42 laws. So 7 times 6 reflects the creation story, as is so often the case in this narrative. But these laws, they start at chapter 20, verse 23, and then they finish at chapter 23, verse 19, the Book of the Covenant. Now, there are lots in these laws. They regulate worship, servanthood, how to treat neighbors and injured people. And if we're honest, some of these are quite hard to read as 21st century people. So let's talk about the difficulty of reading these laws as modern people. How are we meant to make sense of these laws? Let's talk about the laws about slavery. Now, firstly, they strike us as kind of ironic in light of the story so far. Israel has been enslaved in Egypt, and God has heard the cries of their slavery, and he's delivered them from their slavery. And as he delivers them out of their slavery, he gives them laws. And what do the laws tell them? How they should treat their slaves. What's going on here? Isn't this kind of a double standard from God? Is this hypocrisy from God? Is this just racial preference? God, he wants to take care of his Israelite slaves, but he doesn't care about other slaves. I don't think any of those things are true. Any of those accusations that are leveled against the law, I don't think they're accurate. Let's actually have a look at what's going on in these laws. Firstly, the genre of these laws, it's not just that they are laws, they are causal laws. Because most of the way that these laws begin is, if this is the case, then this should be the response. It's if, then. It's causal in relationship, and it's always regulating non-ideal situations. Non-ideal situations, like if we would make a law about how we deal with the messes that Audrey makes. If she spills oil, then I'll wipe it up with detergent. If she spills dirt, then I'll sweep it up. We're in the world of the non-ideal to begin with. That's important to notice here. These laws are regulating how we deal with non-ideal situations. Because I think what this reflects is that there is the world as we would like it to be, and then there is the world as it is. In the ideal world, women are never subject to sexism, black people don't experience racism, politicians are honest and transparent. However, in the world is not ideal. Rather, it's cold, it's brutal, and it's dark. And the Bible is just honest about that world. So the Bible speaks to a world that is messed up, and God decrees that God decrees in this law are dealing with that messed up world. These are some ideas that I've taken from a book by Mike Bird called 7 Things I Wish Every Christian Knew About the Bible. So the Bible's mandates were not always working with ideal situations to begin with. Rather, they were expedient for the environment that God's people inhabited at that time. God's commands for Israelites about war and slaves and women, justice, they made things incrementally better than they were. But they weren't exactly perfect if they were judged even by the New Testament standards, let alone the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Picture these laws, and this is an idea from Mike Bird. He says, picture these laws as God putting on a hazmat suit and entering the messy, less than ideal world and offering some guidance. Even if we sit back 3,000 years later and say that it might not be up to our modern standards. This is God getting dirty in these laws and being realistic in how he fixes problems. So that's the first thing. Second thing I want to say about this section of the law is actually when you take a closer look at these laws, you see that God is making a much better situation for slaves. Many of the laws in this book are about promoting Sabbath rest for slaves. This is about saying that slaves get to have a day off, as the Ten Commandments told us, which is something that the Israelites themselves never experienced in their own slavery. The idea of Sabbath rest is revolutionary for anyone in the ancient world, let alone for the slaves. And then the law goes further than that still, and it says that after 6 years of service, in the seventh year, slaves should be free to go. It says that slaves should be free to marry whom they want, not necessarily whom their owner chooses for them or who their master chooses for them. Many of these laws are actually here to protect the slaves. So the laws about male slaves protect them from the exploitation of people in power. And the ones about female servants are mostly there to guard them against sexual exploitation. Some other things that this law says that are revolutionary is that there should be a death penalty for the killing of a servant. If a slave is injured by the owner, then the slave can go free. Now remember, this is an if-then situation. It's not an ideal situation, but if a slave is injured by an owner, then the slave can go free. The accidental death of a slave requires a payout. Now, you might hear that, you might read that, the life of a slave is worth this much money. And that might sound barbaric at first, but that's actually how we still compensate for work accidents. When somebody dies on the job accidentally, the company gives a payout. It's not an ideal situation, but this is how we deal with these unideal situations. These laws, they talk about so many other things, not taking advantage of the vulnerable, not putting interest on loans to people who are in need, and so on and so forth. Many of these laws reflect first steps in the right direction. And remember, the Bible is a progressive revelation. So Jesus will come along and he will really raise the bar on the moral and ethical standards. So this is the way that I'm thinking about these laws. During the Industrial Revolution, young children were working 16 hours a day, up to 16 hours a day in factory jobs and cleaning chimneys and things like that. And then eventually legislation came in to make it so that they would only have to work 8 hours a day. And we might hear that and think, how terrible. These young children were expected to work instead of having free access to education until they were adults, as it is in our society. Now we might balk at the idea, but aren't these first steps in the right direction something to be celebrated? Do you not think that the children were celebrating the fact that they only had to work an 8-hour day instead of a 16-hour day? You get my point? These laws might seem terrible to us, but they reflect big steps in the right direction. And then Jesus and the New Testament is going to take things even further still. So what we should do when we read these laws is we should rejoice in the value of human beings that is demonstrated in these laws. God has made all of mankind in his image, and here in these laws we see God lovingly providing for the poorest and most vulnerable of his people. So praise God. These laws are actually wonderful and good. Have a good day.